Hey, what's going on, everybody? Boilon here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about something that has the community a little bit concerned, or at least from people that I've spoken to, some others who wanted me to bring this up, but also I've been talking about this a lot, and so I just wanted to get my thoughts out there on this. And a lot of this has to do with Incursion Raid 2 and the recent release of the Extreme X-Men. And as you guys know, Forge is now released, and we have 4 of the Extreme X-Men. But a lot of people are wondering whether or not this team is going to work. There's a lot of valid concerns that I want to kind of address, one by one, and also kind of put this to the community a little bit, and that maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe we're thinking about this the wrong way. And maybe, in fact, that this raid might not be intended for the faint of heart players. I'm going to go into more detail with what I mean exactly, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll get a better idea of what I was trying to kind of tell you all. But yeah, there is some concern here, and we're going to go over all of that. So if you're ready to go, let's boil this down. All right, and so this isn't the first thing that kind of got me thinking about this. It's something that I've been thinking about for some time, but I did see this post, and I kind of wanted to raise it really quickly. This would be yesterday or so, depending on when you're watching this video. And this was on Reddit. So Extreme X-Men 4 with Apocalypse can't beat the boss node. So I think that's where the biggest concern really lies with this Incursion Raid is the boss node, right? And I'm just going to double back to that really quick. So I haven't actually done my notes yet for the day. But where people are having troubles, and I think we can all agree for those of us who have been playing it and are running it, is the Bifrost characters on the boss node and the Darkhold characters that appear in the second wave. So Morgan Le Fay and Wong specifically have insane resistances because they have on-spawn defense up. They're also insane powers, like 600k plus, right? And we know that typically that they have high resistance to begin with, and they're enhanced further in this raid. With the Bifrost characters, they also have some pretty insane resistances. The Beta Ray Bill is the boss, so he's got like insane stats. He's like 800,000, and when they counterattack, because that's the whole shtick for Bifrost in raids, that we're going up against a raid team in raids that not only are the resistances huge, but they counterattack. And you've probably run into this, and they've like killed Apocalypse in one shot, right? Or in a one shot. They basically counterattacked, and Apocalypse is dead because I don't know, he does his basic or something, and then it happens to hit the Bifrost characters, and then you're dead. That's happened to me, so I'm sure it's kind of happened to you guys running this as well. And so I want to kind of double back to this. So definitely they think they need to a rework already, or some boosting. My Gambit was like maxed out. Cyclops is almost maxed out. Nightcrawler almost maxed out. Forge maxed out. So one thing that I do want to say, of course, I didn't think that I knew that the 4-piece was not going to do anything. It was actually worse, in fact, than the 3-piece of Nightcrawler, Gambit, Cyclops, Apocalypse, and Archangel, which is what I'm using currently myself. And you're going to need the full 5-man team. And Sunspot does a lot, right? Sunspot does 75% additional damage in raids. We can go to his kit really quick, and I can kind of show that off in case we're a little bit concerned about what's missing from Sunspot when we're going to get him in probably about 10 days. I think at least for offers, if you're going to buy him, and then for free to play, it's going to be a little bit later on. But his passive is really where it's at, because he's going to give a total of 75%, 50% in raids base, but 75% when he has 5 or more charged. And assuming that you're running him through from the beginning, you're going to be able to get this charges as it carries over through the different nodes, and also with Forge as well. So the expectation is that by the time you load into the boss node, that you're going to have everything prepared. Cyclops is going to have his charges. You're going to have all of your cooldowns. You're going to have your ultimate playing on manual, right? I don't know exactly how it's going to play out on the sim, but we're not really here to talk about sim. And I think we're actually moving away from that being a possibility. There's a couple of concerns that I have, and I think this is something that I probably should have brought up on msf.gg. Actually, really quick, I'm going to bring this up for the characters, because it just showcases it better when you don't have the characters unlocked. There's 2 things here, one with Sunspot and one with Forge. Now, for the boss node in particular, let's just presume that you have all of your abilities on cooldown. Or already you should do so, and you're probably going to open up with your alt, both with Forge and with Sunspot. You can see it here, all the text here as well with the damage, 25% additional damage, and if he has charge, 5 or more charge, they all get 25%, so it's 75%, which is a lot, right? But that's not what I'm concerned about, actually. Believe it or not, I'm actually concerned about their abilities to land debuffs. So even with Cyclops, who, by the way, only it's 100% focus. It's not 200. For some reason, I'm hearing a lot of people say 200% focus. It's not 200% focus. Go look at Cyclops' kit. It's 100%, not 200%. People are misreading this a little bit. So while it is better focus, it's not a lot, if that makes sense. Because right here with Sunspot, his ultimate, which is going to apply offense down and defense down for 2 turns and disrupt all enemies in raids. This is really important, right? But it doesn't have additional focus. And so if you're free to play and you have low stars, let's say 4-star, let's say you're generous and 4-star, we're probably getting 3, but you might get a 4. Will a 4 yellow, 4 red character be able to land debuffs when my 7 yellow, 7 red Apocalypse can't even flip on his ultimate on those Bifrost characters? I am very skeptical. Honestly, my Cyclops, who is G17 maxed out, not G18, but G17 maxed out, and Gambit, who's G18, have a hard time landing debuffs as well. It's not easy. And this is at D0 of the raid. Okay, so I just want to keep this in the back of your mind. We're going to kind of take this a little bit further in a minute. I want to go on to Forge as well, and there's a little bit of a concern with Forge as far as his kit goes. Once again, doesn't get enhanced to focus on his abilities in raids. I feel that they should. Engineering support, which is probably what you're going to kind of start with because it clears all positive effects. So as far as I'm aware, when you start up the match with Beta Ray Bill and the 2 Kid Lokis, they don't have Safeguard, right? They don't start with Safeguard. So you could you could clear all the positive effects with Forge, which would then eliminate the counterattack because the team needs the regen, which activates on Kid Loki's passive, right? So let's just assume that for a minute. But are you going to be able to clear all the positive effects on everyone? Maybe some of the characters, but are you going to be able to clear it on the Bifrost characters? Because this is a pretty big cooldown, so you're probably going to open with this. I don't think you will because there's nothing on here that gives him additional focus, and I don't think that the 100% focus on Cyclops is going to be enough for this team, especially from a free-to-play perspective of 3, 4, maybe even 5 yellow Forge and Sunspot. Okay, now I want to kind of go back to this. We're not going to watch this, but I want to point this video out. So this was from Dorky Dad, and this was before the patch, I think. It was this video down here with Mobile Gamer. New Incursion Raid difficulty is here. Cyclops Mantor, you can see the thumb. Maybe some of you watched it already last week or so when it came out. And basically, he tested them at pretty near maxed out. Like I think they were 7 yellow, 6 red, the new characters at G17. Cyclops was 7 yellow, 7 red, G17 as well, and a Gambit was G18, something like that. They're all pretty high level, almost maxed out. And now he did kind of I want to say misplay this a little bit because he didn't charge up Sunspot beforehand in the previous nodes. He was using the 3-piece Extreme X-Men with the team that I mentioned before through nodes 1 and 2. And so he didn't have those charges ready for Sunspot. And so I would have been curious because I don't have access to the playtest server how that would have been that way. But that's a very big whale Kraken team, right? Like that's a huge team for new characters to be 7 yellow, 6 red. That is not something that free to play are going to be able to get for about 4 months. And they struggled, without having the Sunspot charges. Sunspot was on the team, but they weren't all with the charges with the additional damage. So that's something to keep in mind. But it's the focus part that I really don't think is going to pan out for free to play players because we're going to miss out on a crap ton of additional stats from those red stars. Believe it or not, it will make a big difference. And I want to talk about what that means for us as free-to-player light spenders, that I'm thinking that actually there's 2 things that's going to happen, right? There are one of 2 things. When Scopely gets back from holidays, this is going to be like after the New Year's, and they've had some time to have a conversation about this, but the reason why I'm doing this now is so that it's out there. So people are still thinking about this because it's only going to go one of 2 ways. One, that Extreme X-Men are going to get a heavy rework. Actually, it could go three ways. One is that the Extreme X-Men get a heavy rework, which is what people are thinking needs to happen, because they're not up to par. In the playtest, they weren't up to par. Who knows? Maybe they might go that way. And a lot of people think that's what's going to happen, but hear me out on the other part. So number two, it could be that the raid itself was scaled too heavily, and a lot of this was because it was to counter some of the previous versions of non-Extreme X-Men that we were using to clear this stuff. The resistance levels of the characters are insane on the Bifrost characters and Darkhold. Maybe that needs to get watered down a little bit. And this is D0. They have plans to kind of stretch this out over the level 100 and G19 period, because they didn't create a new raid. They just kind of gave us the exact same raid. They just powered it up. So that tells me that they intend to keep this raid for a while, and they're also going to add difficulty levels to it, which they mentioned before in the blog post as well. So if we're struggling this hard on a D0, then one of the two things that I just mentioned needs to happen. But there's a third thing as well that I kind of want to point out. And I think this is not something that's been talked about, something that people don't want to believe in, that is the case, but it's something that I really need to raise here because it's a valid concern question that we need to ask ourselves. And I was kind of browsing the game myself when I found this out. If you go into Incursion Raid 2 First Strike, if you click the info button, what does it say under the recommendations? And I'm pretty sure this was probably outlined on the blog post when the raid first came out or before the raid came out, which is level 95, G16, 7775 basically, and 6 red, or in this instance 6 yellow, 6 red, ISO blue 3. So normally in previous other raids, this is an exaggeration of what we need. So for those of you who have run this version of the raid in First Strike or the old 2, your Bifrost and your Pegasus have been able to do it typically at like G16, right? Maybe it's easier if you have it higher, but for the most part, G15, G16 characters were sufficient to do this. And that's interesting, right? So that's one thing. Now we've kind of moved on to Incursion, the upgraded version of the raid, and we click on the info button again, and what do we see? Well, we see a lot of the same, but we see gear tier 18 plus. Okay, so that's a magnitude of 2, which is actually quite a bit. Now keep in mind, like this is like 2.0, right? Like this is the First Strike 2.0. That's what they're talking about here, because you can still upgrade the difficulty on this from 0 to 2. So I would say that reasonably that maybe the recommendation for difficulty 2, while not stated, is probably in the range of gear tier 17. But nonetheless, the Incursion Raid 2 recommendations is gear tier 18 plus. Everything else is the same, and we could surmise that that's also 6 yellow, 6 red minimum here. So what does that mean for us? It means that this is meant to be a lot harder than we anticipated, that we think it should be, that, people are manualing, apparently. I'm not, but, apparently some people are manualing the tech and mystic and tech sections. So the Bifrost and the Pegasus. I'm still not. I've not run into walls myself that other people have, but apparently some people have wiped on this when they're doing simming, right? And so that's why they're opting to doing manual play. And so that's interesting. Now, I have actually wiped on the second tech node before. This happens occasionally. My Pegasus outside of Kestrel is about G15, 16. G15 Iron Man, G16 the rest of the characters, and G18 on Kestrel. Now, when this does rarely happen, I do end up bringing my Sinister 6, who are primarily tech, and I think alongside Kang, and that allows me to clean it up. So that does happen sometimes. That's the risk that you get as simming. But when it comes to the mutant lane, and I really want to stress this part that we're going to bring up, is that every subsequent section in the raid have increased raid season points. And this is the first time that they've ever done this, and it's never been done this way before. Which leads me to believe, logically, if you make this connection, that this is intentional. The difficulty of the nodes are intentional to get harder as you go through the raid further. Before, this has never been the case. Largely, for the most part, with on even footing with newer teams, that the requirements for each lane were relatively the same, right? Like Bifrost and Pegasus, for the most part, were like G16 territory. Like you could sim with this in the old raids with G16. Maybe less so now, but my Pegasus is still doing that. But you can see that there's 1.2 million, for example, on the mutant nodes that you get for raid season points, and then 1.5 in bio, and then all the way up to skill, which is 1.8. 8 for the regular nodes, and then the bosses ramp up as well. I think it's 3 times as much. And so this logical connection that this is a wholly intended thing for them, that they wanted to make this hard. They wanted to make the boss node hard, that the bio section is in fact, going to scale up, and then you're going to need to have hive mind at some point to be able to do this, and especially when they bring in the higher difficulties whenever they plan to do that. And skill, I think that invaders is going to be a lot harder for you to use, thus going to force us into getting a new raid team for that. But because of the recommendation and the scaling of the raid season points, it actually says to me, in my opinion, that they want us to build our raid teams bigger. Like I said, Bifrost and Pegasus it's early on in the raid, so you're getting less raid season points, but that they were getting through it roughly in the G16 range of characters, give or take Kestrel and Vol, who people built up a little bit higher. But for everyone else, like that was sufficient. I don't think that that's going to be sufficient anymore for the mutant and further sections of the raid that we're basically looking at possibly G18 for our raid characters that we're going to need. Because this just makes a lot of sense to me. Now, this sucks big time for anyone who's in the free to play and light spending range, because you're not going to be able to at least I'm not going to be able to G18 my entire raid setup basically at this point, for mutant, future bio, and future skill, because it's going to change a lot with how I decide to build my roster, right? If I'm going to need to have all of them at G18, and that's where star levels are going to kick in as well, because when you're thinking about difficulties and power levels this high, that the star levels actually make a difference, where before we were able to get through with just 4 yellow 4 red on the new characters. What if that's no longer the case? What if they actually want us to have to need 6 yellow 6 red, 7 yellow 7 red? And that's the standard where the bar has moved now for these new raids, because farm abilities changed, right? Like now, after 4 months, the characters are permanently made farmable. At least they made good on that. And maybe they're altering the way that we perceive the raids, or the way that we actually see things in the game in terms of our ability to complete it, right? Because otherwise, what makes this? What's the enticement? I was trying to find a better word. What's the reason for people to spend if you can just do it at 4 yellow 4 red, right? Then why spend on the characters, especially for the raids? What is there for the whales and krakens that puts them ahead of everyone else? And I think it's this. I think it's intended to be this hard. They may get a slight, a buff, maybe, but I think that the raid is actually intended to be this difficult, and that we're kind of looking at trying to spread the gap between the free-to-play players and the players who spend to get their star levels up higher and get their characters to G18, because I think that's what Scopely's trying to get us to do. Now, this could all be just hypothetical, right? Like, we don't know until they come out with an actual set of text saying that this is the intent of the raid. Then we're not going to know for sure 100%. But this is what I'm feeling, and this is my gut feeling. And I tend to be pretty accurate when it comes to these assessments. And the question is, are we okay with things changing in that direction? I know that a lot of free-to-play players aren't going to be very happy about this, but this might be a conversation that we need to have. I think this is a conversation that's going to need to happen, especially after the New Year's, when Scopely gets back more full time, so that they can maybe kind of tell us what the intent of this new raid was and how high of a power that we're expected to have the Extreme X-Men. Because if it's at the G18 across the board, 6 yellow, 7 red, then that's going to squeeze out a lot of free-to-play players and light spenders who aren't going to be able to get their characters that high and be able to compete in these raids. But time will tell, won't it? So that's the end of this video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Have you thought about this at all? Like I said, this is a conversation that I've been having in my Discord channel that I just wanted to get out there here on YouTube. So that's it, everyone. And until next time, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see y'all later. Boilon signing out.